L100. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany to introduce draft resolution A/79/L100.
Mr. President, we come together today to discuss the situation in Afghanistan and to adopt a resolution that is traditionally facilitated by Germany. The situation in Afghanistan remains of concern to the international community, and the United Nations and its member states remain engaged on the future of Afghanistan and its people, and that is the main message of this resolution. As the facilitator of this resolution, Germany has actively engaged all UN member states over the past weeks and months. We are strongly convinced the core value of this resolution has always been its consensus orientation. We negotiated in good faith to achieve this aim until the very last day, and we are grateful that so many engaged so constructively. We would like to deeply thank all delegations who actively engaged in the process and whose valuable contributions made the resolution clearer, stronger, and more inclusive. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all co-sponsors of this resolution for their most valuable support. Mr. President, Germany remains committed to the Afghan people. Bilaterally, Germany has provided more than $1 billion for humanitarian assistance and basic human needs since August 2021. Germany deeply appreciates the work of UNAMA and other UN agencies in their daily, exhaustive, and dangerous efforts to improve the lives of the Afghan people. As many others, Germany acknowledges that there is no alternative to engagement with the Taliban, and we will continue to actively contribute to the UN-led Doha process. We support the approach of the UN working groups and remain open for further pragmatic forms of cooperation with the de facto authorities, including on the safe return of Afghan refugees. In this regard, we welcome the initiative of the UN Secretariat to develop a substantial political roadmap for Afghanistan. Germany, together with many others, remains gravely concerned about the dire human rights situation in Afghanistan, especially for Afghan women and girls. The edicts imposed by the Taliban against women and girls amount to a near total erasure of their rights. It is these systematic human rights violations that make the situation in Afghanistan different from that of any other country in the world. Mr. President, the core message of the resolution to the people of Afghanistan are clear. To the Afghan mother holding her sick and underfed child, we see you. To the mourning relatives of those who fall victim to another heinous attack of terrorist groups operating from Afghan territory, we hear you. And to the million of Afghan women and girls locked up at home, we have not forgotten you. And I would like to encourage everyone in the room to support these messages and to lend your valuable support to the resolution in front of us today and vote yes. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Afghanistan.
Mr. President, thank you for convening this important session on the situation of Afghanistan and the adoption of the resolution under this agenda item. Let me begin by expressing our deep appreciation to the government of Germany for its continued principled engagement in support of the Afghan people, and to its permanent mission here in New York for its long-standing leadership and dedicated efforts as traditional facilitator of this resolution. We extend our sincere appreciation to Ambassador Ant J. Linders, Councillor Matthias, and their team for conducting an inclusive and transparent negotiation process. We are equally grateful to all member states that engaged constructively, demonstrating solidarity with the Afghan people by supporting and co-sponsoring this resolution. Mr. President, Afghanistan is at a crossroads. Since August 2021, the country has experienced alarming regression across all sectors, social, political, economic, and human rights. Nearly 4 years under Taliban rule have driven Afghanistan into one of the world's gravest humanitarian and human rights crises, as extensively documented by the Secretary General and the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. The Taliban continue to deny and reject the legitimate demands of Afghan people and the international community. The Taliban's policies have entrenched authoritarian control and codified systemic discrimination, particularly against women and girls. Notable examples include the enactment of the so-called law of the propagation of virtue and the prevention of vice, and the ban on medical institutes, the prohibition of women's employment in NGOs, and threats against Afghan female UN staff. Afghanistan remains the only country in the world where girls are officially banned from secondary and higher education. This policy, now in effect for 4 consecutive academic years, is not only a severe human rights violation, but a strategic disaster undermining peace, prosperity, and the future of the nation. We therefore welcome the resolution's strong emphasis on human rights, governance, and the rule of law. We fully support the urgent call for the reversal of the Taliban policies that institutionalize gender discrimination and gender apartheid in Afghanistan. We reiterate our appeal for strengthened international monitoring and accountability mechanisms, including the full implementation of CEDAW, activation of the International Criminal Court, and crucially, the recognition and codification of gender apartheid as a crime under international law. Mr. President, the resolution rightly underscores the lasting peace in Afghanistan requires inclusive, representative, and participatory governance. We strongly support the call for credible political process rooted in genuine intra-Afghan dialogue that reflects the diverse aspirations of all Afghans, women, youth, minorities, and civil society. The Taliban are a group which, should they wish, be part of the solution to Afghanistan's crisis, but they can never be the sole solution by themselves. They are by no means representative of the Afghan people or its culture, nor do their policies reflect Islamic values. We welcome the resolution's encouragement of the Secretary General to appoint a coordinator to facilitate a more coherent, coordinated, and structured international approach, and to promote the recommendations of the independent assessment. We hope that the coordinator, with full authority, could coordinate diplomatic efforts, facilitate inclusive political dialogue, ensure engagement with all Afghan stakeholders. Any form of legitimacy must be derived through respect for the will of the Afghan people. Afghan ownership must remain central to any legitimate political solution. These are 2 key imperatives which the people of Afghanistan expect to receive greater attention by the international friends of Afghanistan in the way forward. Mr. President, we commend the resolution's focus on the dire humanitarian situation and its call for principled, gender-responsive assistance. With over 23 million Afghans in urgent need of life-saving aid amid economic collapse and climate-induced disasters, international solidarity is not optional, it's a moral obligation. We echo the resolution's call for sustained support to prevent the collapse of essential services and emphasize the need to protect humanitarian access, especially for Afghan women aid workers who have been unlawfully barred from working. Mr. President, on education, we welcome the resolution's dedicated section by reaffirming its unwavering commitment to inclusive, equitable, quality education. The Taliban's continued denial of education to girls, coupled with the growing number of so-called jihadi madrasas replacing modern schools, gravely compromises Afghanistan's future. Denying girls the right to learn is not only a moral outrage, it is a national tragedy. We commend regional and international efforts to support Afghan youth's education and urge further expansion of educational access for women and girls both inside and outside the country. Mr. President, on the plight of Afghan refugees, I would like to draw the serious attention of this assembly to the situation of Afghan refugees, particularly regarding their forced return and the disturbing reports of inhumane treatment, which have increased in recently. We thank the resolution's sponsors for recognizing the urgent need for sustained and principled support. We remain grateful to host countries, particularly the Islamic Republic of Iran and Pakistan, for their long-standing hospitality. However, we express serious concern about the ongoing forced returns of Afghan refugees under unsafe and inhumane conditions. Many of these individuals fled political persecution, gender-based violence, and systemic repression. This is taking place while the humanitarian crisis, poverty, unemployment, and uncertainty about the future continue to prevail in Afghanistan. We urge all host countries, especially Iran and Pakistan, to uphold the principles of non-refoulement and to manage refugee matters with compassion in accordance with international law, Islamic values, and good neighborly principles. Increased international solidarity and support is essential to ensure the safety, dignity, and sustainable reintegration of Afghan refugees, as well as to the host countries. Mr. President, we share the resolution's strong concern regarding presence of over 24 terrorist groups in Afghanistan, as confirmed by the UN monitoring team. These groups, including ISLK and Al-Qaeda affiliates, and foreign terrorist fighters, pose grave threats to regional and global security. The alarming proliferation of jihadi madrasas also contributes to the radicalization of youth and the spread of violent extremism. Afghanistan must never again become a safe haven or breeding ground for terrorism. The nexus between terrorism and the illicit narcotics trade further destabilize the region and Afghanistan. We therefore welcome the resolution's comprehensive language on counterterrorism and counter-narcotics, and we underscore the importance of coordinated, right-based, and multilateral approach that fully respects international humanitarian and human rights law. Mr. President, this resolution rightly establishes clear benchmarks for any form of international engagement with the Taliban. These include respect for human rights, meaningful progress on inclusive and representative governance, and full compliance with counterterrorism and counter-narcotics obligations. Such engagement must remain principled, conditional, and benchmark-driven, not motivated by geopolitical expediency. We acknowledge the role of United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan and its potential to promote peace and stability. However, for UNAMA to remain credible and effective, it must expand its engagement with the full spectrum of Afghan society, especially democratic actors, women leaders, youth, and civil society, as called for in its mandate. While we note ongoing initiatives, including the Mosaic framework, we reiterate our serious concern regarding its transparency, inclusivity, and strategic clarity. Any credible UN-led political process must be Afghan-owned, inclusive, conditional, and accompanied by clear accountability measures and enforceable benchmarks to avoid legitimizing oppressive Taliban policies. We would like to emphasize on the need to establish a structured platform under the UN-led Doha process for regular consultation with Afghan democratic forces and stakeholders, civil society, organizations, and diaspora representatives, ensuring their participation in shaping and implementing the political roadmap. Mr. President, in conclusion, the people of Afghanistan deserve future anchored in dignity, justice, and opportunity. By adopting this resolution, the United Nations sends us a resounding message. The Afghan people are not forgotten, and their struggle is not in vain. Let us now move from words to action. Let us honor our shared responsibility to uphold universal human rights, restore Afghan sovereignty to its people, and hold those responsible for grave violations accountable. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Afghanistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union, speaking on behalf of the EU and its member states.
Mr. President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states, the candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Georgia, as well as Iceland, Andorra, and San Marino align themselves with this statement. Let me begin by reaffirming the European Union's commitment to the people of Afghanistan and our determination to support a peaceful, stable, and prosperous future for the country. The recent senior officials meeting on Afghanistan, convened by the European Union in Brussels, ensured our continued engagement and coordination with international partners. The situation in Afghanistan, dear colleagues, is extremely challenging, with deepening human rights concerns, especially the massive violation of the rights of women and girls, which may amount to gender persecution, as well as those of minorities, the erosion of civic space, widespread displacement, and limited access to essential services, food insecurity, and immense humanitarian needs. Colleagues, the EU is deeply concerned about the impact of the so-called morality law, PVPV law, adopted in 2024, which represents a further assault on the rights and freedoms of all Afghan women and girls. We unequivocally condemn the continued denial of the right to education for all, freedom of expression, movement and work, and the severe limitation of their participation in all spheres of society and public life. We are particularly concerned about the recent harassment and threats against female UN personnel in Kabul. How is this acceptable in any context, in any country? How is this acceptable? The perpetrators of these acts must be held accountable. The EU urges the Taliban to repeal all laws restricting human rights, including the so-called PVPV law, and to uphold Afghanistan's international human rights obligations. The Taliban, as the de facto rulers, bear full political and moral responsibility to respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of all Afghans without discrimination. We expect the Taliban to take concrete steps to ensure inclusive governance and respect for human rights, and call for the full implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 2593. Colleagues, the EU welcomes the efforts of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan and the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Afghanistan. Their efforts are essential in documenting violations, advocating for accountability, and promoting a rights-based path to peace and stability. We emphasize the importance of continued support by the international community and a principled, coherent, and structured multilateral approach in working towards a viable future for Afghanistan, not least to prevent it from becoming a safe haven for terrorism or a source of further displacement and irregular migration. We reiterate our support for the UN-led Doha process, which remains the only multilateral framework for promoting an inclusive political settlement. The EU welcomes the efforts for developing a comprehensive approach, but we reiterate the necessity to ensure that this process is inclusive and benefits all Afghan people in line with the recommendations of the UN Special Coordinator's independent assessment. The EU also calls for the appointment of a UN Special Envoy for Afghanistan, in line with UNSC Resolution 2721, to facilitate international coordination, promote a peaceful resolution to the conflict, and support the implementation of the Comprehensive Approach Roadmap. Mr. President, the EU calls for governance structures that reflect the diversity of Afghanistan's society and ensure the full participation of women and girls, as well as ethnic and religious minorities. The EU will continue to engage with wider and representative communities of Afghans, including through the Afghan Women Leaders Forum, to ensure that the voices of all Afghans are heard and respected. The EU is deeply concerned about the security situation and the threat posed by the remaining presence of terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda and ISKP. We urge the Taliban to take concrete steps to sever all ties with these and other international terrorist organizations, and to prevent the use of Afghan territory for hosting, financing, or exporting terrorism to other countries. In response to the deteriorating humanitarian and economic situation, the European Union remains committed to providing support to the Afghan people. We have committed 1.8 billion euros since August 21 to humanitarian aid, to basic services, to livelihood support. Our assistance is directed to the Afghan people and is guided by the principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence. In conclusion, Mr. President, the European Union remains committed to supporting the people of Afghanistan and promoting a peaceful, stable, and prosperous future for the country, in coordination with international partners. The resolution before us today reflects our shared responsibility and provides a basis for continuing a constructive dialogue on the way ahead. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia.
سيد الرئيس.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for holding this session on the situation in Afghanistan. I would also like to thank the delegation of Germany for facilitating the negotiations on the draft resolution. We stress and reaffirm our principled position, supporting the stability in Afghanistan and respecting its sovereignty, territorial unity, in order to achieve the aspirations of the brotherly Afghani people to a more stable and prosperous future. We express our concern regarding the continuing humanitarian and economic challenges facing the Afghani people. We call for making extra efforts by the international community to provide humanitarian and relief support to alleviate the suffering of the brotherly Afghani people and to ensure the rights of women and girls. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has always stood by the brotherly Afghani people and has supported it at all levels. We have provided during the previous 3 years assistance and development assistance through the King Salman Center for Relief and Humanitarian Work, through providing medicine and basic goods to millions of Afghani people. At the diplomatic level, the Kingdom has played a great role in mobilizing international efforts to support the security and stability of Afghanistan. We hosted in Jeddah an international conference on the status of women in Islam, where we stressed the need to empower Afghani women and ensuring their right to education, work, and public life. We stress our continued commitment to support all political initiatives internationally to ensure security and development in Afghanistan. In conclusion, Mr. President, we believe that achieving security and stability in Afghanistan is vital to ensure stability of the region and the world. We therefore stress the need not to allow the Afghani state to become a place for terrorist acts and a place for exporting narcotics that destabilize the world. We will continue to support political, humanitarian, and development efforts to ensure stability in Afghanistan. Once again, we call for not leaving Afghanistan behind, for providing assistance to the Afghani people so that they can achieve their aspirations to a free, stable country, and we value all efforts made in this regard by member states and the UNAMA. We stress the need for coordinating effort and collective work to address challenges to promote stability and prosperity in Afghanistan. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Saudi Arabia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
شكرا لكم.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank you for holding this meeting, and we thank Germany for tabling the draft resolution before us today. Mr. President, the State of Qatar reaffirms that it will continue to make effort to support and assist Afghanistan in confronting the large challenges it is facing in achieving peace and stability, which started with the Doha peace process in Afghanistan. Doha also hosted a number of dialogues as part of a comprehensive political process that includes all segments of the Afghan society, and the talks that led in 2020 to the peace agreement between the United States and the Taliban movement. Our role continues on many levels, including supporting and facilitating dialogue between the United Nations, concerned states, and the Afghan caretaker government, including by hosting the UN-led Doha process based on the initiative of the Secretary General of the United Nations, which was welcomed by the draft resolution before us today. This process included meetings of the special envoys on Afghanistan that was held in Doha in May 2023 and February and July 2024. These efforts aim at adopting a comprehensive process to facilitate a principled international participation in a consistent manner, which would provide favorable conditions that will allow Afghanistan to achieve peace and to strengthen their good neighborliness relations and to reintegrate fully in the international community and to meet its international commitments. To achieve these objectives on the ground, the Doha process included ad hoc working groups based on the priority areas that were identified by the independent assessment on Afghanistan. Recently in Doha, the Anti-Narcotics Working Group held its third meeting on the 30th of June in order to assess and improve anti-narcotics cooperation and to reduce the effects of drugs regionally and globally. On the 1st of July, we held the second meeting of the ad hoc working group on the private sector in order to support the participation of the private sector in the economy. A number of experts participated in the Doha process, as well as representatives from ministries in the Afghan caretaker government. Mr. President, it is hopeful that Afghanistan is witnessing improvement in a number of areas, as identified in the draft resolution. However, Afghanistan continues to face many challenges that require international support in order to build peace and maintain peace in Afghanistan. The humanitarian, economic, and political situation in Afghanistan requires further international assistance while meeting the principles of humanitarian assistance. There's also a need to confront natural catastrophes such as drought and floodings. We also need to provide opportunities for economic recovery and sustainable development, as well as strengthening opportunities for education for all. The State of Qatar will continue to make every effort in cooperation with the UN to provide international humanitarian support to the Afghan people, including food assistance, healthcare, education opportunities for Afghani kids, as well as supporting programs to empower Afghan women and enable Afghan women to be resilient and to support the youth. In conclusion, Mr. President, the State of Qatar reaffirms the importance of concerted international efforts to enable the Afghan people to build a country of peace, stability, and development. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Qatar. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, Let me begin by thanking Germany for introducing draft resolution A/79/L100. Today's meeting takes place amidst rising geopolitical tensions and multiple global crises. Yet, even as the world situation is pulled in many directions, we cannot afford to turn a blind eye to the long-suffering people of Afghanistan. Their plight must not be buried under the weight of competing headlines. More than 2 years since the political transition, the Afghan people remains trapped in a cycle of acute humanitarian crisis and economic despair. Conditions rooted not only in decades of war, but also compounded by economic blockades and institutional collapse. Mr. President, the draft resolution before us seeks to highlight and address the situation in Afghanistan in a comprehensive manner. Indonesia's support for this resolution stems from our conviction that the international community must stay the course through engagement, not isolation. In our view, continued engagement must be guided by 3 clear priorities. First, the participation of Afghan women and girls is central to any path forward. Indonesia continues to invest in programs that empower Afghan women through scholarships and trainings. We were proud to co-host with Qatar the first international conference on Afghan women's education, raising over $1 billion in support of this cause. Indonesia underscores that meaningful societal transformation can only be achieved through incremental and inclusive processes that is Afghan-led and Afghan-owned and involving all elements of its society. Second, sustained engagement and a deeper understanding of Afghanistan's internal dynamics are essential. As the world's most populous Muslim majority country, Indonesia upholds the principles of Islam as rahmatan lil alamin, a blessing for all creation. In this spirit, we continue to promote dialogue between Indonesian and Afghan ulama to foster mutual understanding in the practice of Islam, particularly in relation to moderation and tolerance. In these exchanges, which have included women ulama from Indonesia, we have emphasized that access to education for women and girls in harmony with Islamic values is vital to nurturing peace and rebuilding Afghan society. Third, Indonesia continues to call on the de facto authorities to fulfill their promises and commitments. We welcome recent progress within the Doha process, particularly the inclusive discussions in the 2 working groups. We hope this momentum can be sustained to support post-conflict reconstruction and deliver tangible solutions for the Afghan people. We also commend significant progress in opium poppy eradication and efforts to ensure the provision of sustainable alternative livelihoods for former opium farmers need to be sustained. However, we have yet to see significant developments in other areas that the de facto authorities have committed to. Indonesia remains concerned with the deterioration of the humanitarian situation, as well as restrictive policies and practices that negatively impacts women and girls. Concrete steps are urgently needed, including the development of a credible roadmap with actionable commitments by the de facto authorities. And at the same time, humanitarian agencies must be given the resources they need to operate effectively. Mr. President, in closing, the future of Afghanistan cannot be dictated by the legacies of conflict. It must be forged by the aspirations of its people for a life of dignity, peace, and opportunity, and Indonesia stands ready to contribute to that vision. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. President, for holding this meeting on the situation in Afghanistan. Australia would like to thank Germany for its efforts in coordinating this resolution and also its wider work to support Afghanistan. The situation in Afghanistan continues to worsen. Afghanistan continues to move away from, not towards, fulfilling its international obligations and meeting the humanitarian and basic needs of its population, over half of which require assistance. At the same time, the Taliban seeks to exercise illegitimate authority. We are alarmed by the human rights situation and that it continues to deteriorate. We condemn and continue to condemn the egregious treatment of women and girls in Afghanistan. We continue to raise our deep concerns with the treatment of women and girls in Afghanistan at the Human Rights Council, and we will continue to do so here. Together with Canada, Germany and the Netherlands, Australia has commenced legal action to hold Afghanistan to account for the violations of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW. Since 2021, we have allocated over $260 million in humanitarian and basic needs assistance, strongly focused on the protection of women and girls. We're concerned that terrorist groups operating in Afghanistan threaten security and stability in the immediate region and beyond. In conclusion, Mr. President, we have a responsibility as an international community to continue to engage on the challenges confronting the Afghan people and the related impact on its region and globally. A coordinated international response is imperative, and a political process is vital. A successful political process must deliver tangible, durable progress on human rights and inclusive representative governance, along with concrete steps to sustainably provide for the Afghan population. It is for these reasons that Australia supports this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to begin by thanking Germany for facilitating this comprehensive, balanced, and principled text, which we are pleased to co-sponsor. Despite the absence of active armed conflict, Afghanistan warrants our sustained attention and support. The country faces the world's second-largest humanitarian needs and systematic denial of the rights of the women and girls, terrorist groups exploiting weak governance and regional volatility, and ongoing drug-related challenges. I'd like to highlight 3 points. First, the Republic of Korea approach to Afghanistan remains firmly anchored in promoting interlinkages between the human rights, development, and peace. The issue of education, as reflected in the resolution before us, exemplifies this critical nexus. The unjustifiable ban on secondary and higher education, as well as medical training for Afghan women and girls, persists. The resilient Afghan women entrepreneurs, midwives, and teachers demonstrate what is at stake. Indeed, a World Bank study estimates that education bill will cost the Afghan economy up to $1.4 billion annually. We urge the Taliban to pay heed to the General Assembly's call for inclusive, equitable, and quality education. Korea underscores this point as a country that rose from the ashes of war to development and prosperity through a national commitment to education for all. Second, our life-saving support to Afghan people will continue, building on our contribution of around $94 million since 2021, while prioritizing the humanitarian needs of women, children, and refugees. We recognize the acute livelihood insecurity affecting local communities. To this end, we joined the Special Trust Fund for Afghanistan last April and will resume our water supply project in Kabul, benefiting local residents, including ethnic minorities. On the sideline of the fourth conference on financing for development held last week, we launched our humanitarian assistance initiatives and key projects for this year. These include $10 million project with the UNDP to provide emergency livelihood opportunities for women, IDPs, and returnees, and to help rehabilitate local water and agriculture infrastructure in Afghanistan. We hope that our efforts are reciprocated. At a minimum, humanitarian access must not be hindered in any form. Third, we call on fellow member states to rally around the goal of the coherent and coordinated international engagement. The UN-led Doha process remains the only agreed pathway for Afghanistan's reintegration into the international community. We hope to see progress on appointing a dedicated agent or a coordinator as proposed in the draft resolution to reconcile different priorities. Let us also record that Doha process operates within the broader context of the international engagement. In this regard, we hope that ongoing regional engagement will generate synergy with the UN-led efforts. Mr. President, in conclusion, as a Doha process participant and a member of the Security Council, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its commitment to supporting the Afghan people in building a peaceful, inclusive, and prosperous Afghanistan. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Mr. President, I'd like to begin by expressing our appreciation to Mr. President for convening today's debate at this critical juncture for Afghanistan. I'd also like to thank Germany for facilitating consultations on the draft resolution on the situation in Afghanistan. Japan is proud to be a co-sponsor of this draft resolution A/79/L100. We believe that this text covers all aspects of the challenges that Afghanistan faces in a comprehensive manner. Since the adoption of the previous resolution in November 2022, the international community and the United Nations have striven to increase international engagement with Afghanistan in a more coherent, coordinated, and structured manner. Japan has contributed to this effort proactively, both on the ground through our embassy in Kabul and here in New York. Throughout our Security Council term in 2023 and 2024, Japan led the discussion on Afghanistan as a penholder and facilitated the issuance of the Independent Assessment Report and adoption of Security Council Resolution 2721, which reaffirms that our objective is to achieve an Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbors, fully reintegrated into international community and meeting its international obligations. To this end, Japan has also supported UN-led Doha process. We welcome that these major developments are reflected in the draft resolution. However, as the draft resolution illustrates, Afghanistan continues to be confronted with a myriad of issues. The social, economic, and humanitarian situation in Afghanistan remains dire. Significant deprivation of rights and freedoms persist. Terror attacks continue to occur sporadically. The country's challenges are compounded by natural disasters and climate change, as well as the mass return of Afghan citizens from its neighboring countries. Among others, Japan is especially concerned about the restrictive measures imposed on women and girls. As we approach 4 years since Taliban's takeover, it is unacceptable that window for higher education remains closed to them. While we acknowledge some progress made by the Taliban, including in the area of security and counter-narcotics, the country's multifaceted issues cannot be addressed by Afghanistan or its neighbors alone. Nevertheless, the lack of progress on human rights issues limits the scope for international engagement and assistance. Therefore, Japan once again urges the Taliban to swiftly reverse its repressive policies. This is not solely about human rights. It also severely undermines the potential of Afghanistan's prosperity, as well as international engagement and confidence-building efforts. While we welcome that the latest working groups were held in person in Doha last week, whether this process will lead to full-fledged international assistance hinges on the Taliban side's actions. Despite this difficult situation, Japan will not cease its engagement with Afghanistan nor its support for the Afghan people. As international aid to Afghanistan continues to decline, we believe it is important to move beyond humanitarian assistance to provide basic human needs support and economic empowerment for the self-reliance and sustainable growth of the Afghan people. From this perspective, Japan has placed livelihood support at the center of its effort, with a particular focus on supporting women entrepreneurs and female workers. Through our program, Project for Strengthening Women's Economic Activity in Private Sector, a $10 million initiative implemented by UNDP in collaboration with Japan's aid agency, JICA, we are providing capacity building and financial support to 1,400 Afghan women-led businesses. Japan is sincere in its desire to help alleviate the suffering of the Afghan people, and we will remain steadfast in our efforts to improve the situation in the country. I'd like to close my statement by expressing hope that this draft resolution will send a strong signal of support to the Afghan people. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Greece.
Mr. President, Greece aligns itself with a statement delivered by the European Union and would like to add the following in our national capacity. We would like to thank Germany for presenting this important resolution through a transparent negotiation process in which Greece actively participated. We believe that the final text sends a strong message of continued international support to the people of Afghanistan. At the same time, it reminds the Taliban of its international obligations, respecting human rights, particularly women's rights, establishing an inclusive government with the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women and minorities, and combating terrorism. In this framework, Greece, as an elected member of the Security Council for the period 2025-2026, fully supports international efforts for the normalization of Afghanistan's relations with the international community, particularly the UN-led Doha process and the working groups on counter-narcotics and the private sector. For the international community, principled engagement with the Taliban is the only way forward. But more importantly, the Taliban's engagement in good faith is an absolute prerequisite towards an Afghanistan at peace with itself and its neighbors, fully integrated in the international community and meeting its international obligations. Mr. President, Greece appreciates the resolution's strong language on human rights, particularly women's rights. The Taliban's promulgation of more than 80 directives and decrees targeting the autonomy and everyday lives of women signifies an ongoing pattern of gender discrimination and gender-based violence which may amount to gender persecution. The law on propagation of virtue and prevention of vice represents a deliberate effort by the Taliban to erase women from public life and silence their voices. It is abhorrent that March marked the beginning of the fourth consecutive school year with girls beyond the 6th grade remaining out of school. This decision by the Taliban is not only morally unacceptable, but it is projected to have long-term detrimental effects on the country's economy and social fabric. Greece condemns in the strongest terms the systematic and systemic violations and abuses of the human rights and fundamental freedoms of Afghan women and urges the Taliban to put an end to these practices. Moreover, we are deeply concerned about the human rights violations against ethnic and minority groups alongside reprisals against civil society representatives and human rights defenders. Restrictions on journalists are equally deplorable, posing a serious threat to media freedom. We are also alarmed by the continuing terrorist attacks in Afghanistan that are one of the most serious threats to peace and security in the country and the region. We reiterate our position that Afghanistan should not become a safe haven for terrorist organizations. We appreciate the resolution's clear reminder to the Taliban of their international obligation to counter terrorism. Mr. President, Allow me to conclude by reiterating Greece's solidarity with the people of Afghanistan and support to UNAMA and its efforts to foster a more coherent, coordinated, and structured engagement between the international community and the Taliban. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Greece. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the People's Republic of China.
President, China welcomes the consideration of the General Assembly once again of the Afghan issue. At present, Afghanistan is at a critical stage of peaceful reconstruction. Its overall situation remains stable, its economy gradually improves, and its external exchanges become more active. At the same time, Afghanistan is still facing serious challenges in areas such as humanitarian situation, development, human rights, counterterrorism, and women's rights. We expect the international community to take a comprehensive and objective view of the situation in Afghanistan and play a constructive role in supporting the reintegration of the country into the international community at an early date and the Afghan people living in stability. First, we must respond to the humanitarian needs of Afghanistan. Nearly 23 million Afghan people need humanitarian assistance, but only 15.7% of the humanitarian funds required for this year have been secured, and the drastic reduction in foreign aid by major donors has had a serious impact on the humanitarian situation in Afghanistan. The prompt resumption and scaling up of assistance to Afghanistan, especially to ensure that humanitarian assistance is not politicized or instrumentalized, is crucial to the survival and development of the Afghan people. We call on traditional donors, especially the country that bears historical responsibility for the current situation in Afghanistan, to increase their financial input and help the Afghan people overcome difficulties. Second, we must help Afghanistan achieve autonomous development. We welcome the recent meetings of the Doha Process Working Groups on private sector development and counter-narcotics. We look forward to a greater role of the working groups to achieve more results, to better meet the development needs of the Afghan people. We call on all parties to continue to help Afghanistan through bilateral, multilateral, and regional cooperation mechanisms to enhance its capacity for autonomous development and gradually integrate into the regional and world economy. The countries concerned should immediately lift the illegal unilateral sanctions against Afghanistan, unconditionally unfreeze and return its overseas assets, and create conditions for Afghanistan to rebuild its financial system, develop its economy, and people's livelihoods. Third, we must consolidate our engagement and dialogue with Afghanistan. The interim government has been in power for nearly 4 years and has made considerable efforts to advance peaceful reconstruction in the country. China supports the international community to strengthen contacts and exchanges with the interim government in order to enhance understanding and trust and find effective solutions to the concerns of all parties. Historical experience has shown that any action taken by the UN, including the appointment of special envoys or coordinators, should, as far as possible, be communicated with the countries concerned, respect their views, and be fully coordinated with through extensive consultations with all stakeholders. Otherwise, not only will it be impossible to implement it effectively and to achieve the desired results, but it may also run counter to the objectives of engagement and dialogue. Fourth, the human rights situation in Afghanistan must be improved. Ensuring the basic rights and interests of all Afghans is the expectation of the international community and a necessary requirement for social stability and economic development in Afghanistan. In this regard, giving Afghan women equal rights to education, employment, and participation in public affairs is the unanimous call of the international community. All parties concerned should continue to engage in dialogue and urge and guide the interim government to pay attention to the concerns of the outside world and take measures to protect the basic rights and interests of women and girls. It should also be noted that women's rights and interests cannot be realized in a vacuum. By supporting the peaceful reconstruction of Afghanistan, we create conditions conducive to safeguarding the rights and interests of all Afghans, including women. Fifth, it is imperative to support Afghanistan to resolutely combat terrorism. Terrorist terrorist forces such as Daesh, Al-Qaeda, the ETIM, and the TTP still pose a serious threat to Afghanistan and to international and regional security. The international community should urge and support the interim government to take stronger counterterrorism measures while helping the country develop its economy, improve people's livelihoods, and safeguard human rights so as to eradicate the breeding ground for terrorism and prevent Afghanistan from once again becoming a hub for terrorist organizations. On counterterrorism, it is important to resolutely oppose double standards and selective approaches, as well as the manipulation of issues of counterterrorism in service of geopolitical strategies. It is essential to strive to safeguard international counterterrorism cooperation. President, as a friendly neighbor connected to Afghanistan by mountains and rivers, China has always respected its independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity, and has always taken practical actions to support its peace, stability, development, and prosperity. We encourage and support the interim government to be inclusive and moderate in its governance and to achieve national reconciliation and unity through dialogue and consultation. We have provided substantial emergency humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan to help cope with natural disasters and resettle returning refugees. We are actively engaged in economic and trade cooperation with Afghanistan, and the China-Afghanistan Air Corridor of pine nuts generates tens of millions of dollars in income for the Afghan people annually. We have granted hundreds of Afghan women visas to study in China, and its textile factories built by Chinese enterprises have helped a large number of Afghan women realize employment and economic independence. China has always been committed to enhancing international and regional coordination on the Afghan issue. We have participated actively in the foreign ministers' meeting among the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Moscow Format, the China-Afghan-Pakistan Trilateral Foreign Ministers Dialogue, and the informal meeting of China, Russia, Pakistan, Iran foreign ministers, and other regional mechanisms on Afghanistan to promote greater attention to and assistance for Afghanistan by the regional countries and to help accelerate the country's connectivity and economic integration. We will actively participate in the discussions of Afghanistan at the UN and other multilateral platforms, support UNAMA in playing its bridging role, support the Doha process in achieving more results, support UNDP, UNHCR, and other UN agencies to further increase their assistance to Afghanistan and endeavor to build a common understanding, a synergy in the international community to stabilize and help Afghanistan. President, the GA is about to take action on the draft resolution on Afghanistan. Over the past month, Germany, as the facilitator, has organized multiple rounds of consultations, listened to the views of all parties with a view to achieving consensus. China appreciates its efforts. We believe that there is still room for improvement in the draft resolution, and some important views have not been taken on board or reflected. China is ready to continue to communicate and consult with all parties on the relevant issues within the framework of the GA and the Security Council. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that China is ready to continue to work with all parties to make greater efforts and contributions to the early resolution of the Afghan issue and to the realization of lasting peace and security in Afghanistan. I thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of China. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Uzbekistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, allow me to thank the German delegation for facilitating the draft resolution process. Mr. President, the current situation in Afghanistan remains complex and unpredictable. In this regard, we reiterate forced isolation of Afghanistan must not be allowed as the fate of millions of people is at stake. As a close neighbor of Afghanistan, Uzbekistan advocates for an open, equal, pragmatic, and mutually beneficial dialogue with Kabul. At the same time, we believe that the de facto authorities must continue to take steps toward the international community, namely to uphold human rights, ensure access to education and decent working conditions for all segments of the population, and guarantee the smooth operation and safety of international organizations working in the country. All this will contribute to further integration of the country into a global process. Mr. Vice President, despite the difficult economic situation since August 2021, the current Afghan government has managed to improve the situation and establish internal and external economic processes. The issues of security, combating drug trafficking have improved, and the trade with the neighboring and regional countries has grown. To continue this positive momentum and development, it's necessary to further invest resources and efforts into implementing major projects in the sectors such as infrastructure, logistics, agriculture, and water management. Uzbekistan views Afghanistan as one of the key factors in consolidating regional interconnectivity, uniting the border macro-region of Central and South Asia, Middle East, and Eurasia as whole. The vision is reflected in the UN General Assembly Resolution A/RAC/76/295 from 11 July 2022 on connectivity between Central and South Asia. Accordingly, Uzbekistan supports active engagement in implementing large-scale transport and logistics and energy projects that would not only integrate Afghanistan into regional economic process, but also contribute to strengthening peace and stability in the country. Among these projects are the construction of the Trans-Afghan Railway Corridor, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and the Surkhan-Puli-Khumri Power Transmission Line. The development of trade and economic ties with Afghanistan is also supported by the Termes International Trade Center, Free Trade Zone, which began operation in August 2024. The center offers unique opportunities for goods transit and fostering active trades. Today, Afghan farmers and artisans successfully use the center to sell their products, earning income to support their families amid Afghanistan's challenging humanitarian conditions. The medical clinic operating in the zone provides a wide range of services, making the center not only an economic but also a humanitarian hub that can significantly improve the quality of life for Afghan people. International hub in Termes is also serving various UN agencies and regional countries. Notably, early this year, the hub was included in the global supply network of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, expanding its capacity to deliver humanitarian cargo to Afghanistan and beyond. Uzbekistan is also committed to support the people of Afghanistan, particularly Afghan women and girls, through education and vocational empowerment. The Education Center for Afghan Citizens in Termes, since its establishment in 2017, has trained almost 830 Afghan citizens, provided bachelor degrees, vocational training, and short-term courses. Uzbekistan firmly believes that the investment in education and empowerment is the surest path to a peaceful, inclusive, and stable Afghanistan. Mr. President, to conclude, Uzbekistan considers it of a critical importance for UN member states to continue developing a UN-led, coordinated, and constructive approach on Afghanistan recovery. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uzbekistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. We also extend our appreciation to Germany for its constructive facilitation throughout the negotiating process. The situation in Afghanistan remains fragile and continues to demand the sustained attention of the international community. Persistent threats such as terrorism, drug production and trafficking, and irregular migration continue to endanger both regional and global security. Afghanistan also faces severe economic and humanitarian crisis. Decline in international donor support risks further deepening an already precarious situation, marked by rising poverty and worsening food insecurity. It is essential that the flow of humanitarian aid remains uninterrupted. Human rights situation remains a huge concern. We are particularly alarmed by the ongoing restrictions on girls' access to education and women's participation in the workforce. Reversal of these policies is crucial, not only to improve the human rights situation, but also to ensure the long-term sustainability of Afghan socio-economic development. Equally vital is the need to prevent Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for terrorist organizations. Presence of Daesh in Afghanistan is a matter of particular concern. A strong and unified international effort is necessary to effectively counter this threat. Mr. President, we attach great importance to the independent assessment report prepared by Special Coordinator Ambassador Sinirlioğlu. The report offers a realistic and constructive framework for the way forward. The report's recommendations should guide our collective engagement, ensuring that aspirations of the Afghan people, particularly women and girls, are upheld. In this regard, we welcome the recent initiative led by UNAMA to develop a roadmap aligned with the report's recommendations. However, we still await the appointment of a UN Special Envoy and the establishment of a contact group, as outlined in the Security Council Resolution 2721 and the independent assessment. Respect for human rights and the establishment of an inclusive governance structure are indispensable to achieving sustainable peace and stability in Afghanistan. This can only be realized through the genuine inclusion of all segments of Afghan society, particularly women, in both decision-shaping and decision-making processes. In this context, we consider the Doha process as well as the establishment of the working groups on private sector and counter-narcotics as important steps toward fostering structured and coordinated dialogue with the de facto authorities. We also underscore significance of the regional engagement. At the 51st session of the OIC Council of Foreign Ministers held in Istanbul, the OIC Ministerial Contact Group on Afghanistan was formally established. Similarly, the Working Group on Afghanistan, operating within the framework of the Organization of Turkic States, held its first meeting on 7th March. We believe both platforms will serve as valuable contributions to broader international efforts on Afghanistan. Mr. President, Turkey, with its deep-rooted historical and humanitarian ties with Afghanistan, will continue to stand in solidarity with the Afghan people. We remain committed to supporting all efforts aimed at building a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Afghanistan in close cooperation with the United Nations and the broader international community. Thank you again.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Slovenia.
Mr. President, Slovenia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union and would like to add a few points in our national capacity. We thank Germany for their dedicated efforts in facilitating the process leading to this text of the resolution before us. Slovenia fully aligns with the concerns shared today. By supporting this resolution, we send a clear and vital message to the people of Afghanistan. You are not forgotten. Mr. President, we are deeply concerned over deteriorating humanitarian situation, further exacerbated by environmental degradation, climate shocks, and natural disasters. These persistent pressures on the humanitarian crisis have profound repercussions for overall stability of Afghanistan. Slovenia has supported the Afghan people through contributions to the key humanitarian organizations on the ground, and we will continue doing so also in the future. Mr. President, we remain very concerned about the state of human rights, particularly for women and girls, who continue to be completely erased from public life. Such human rights violations inevitably weaken Afghanistan's long-term prosperity, stability, and security. We reiterate our call for the Taliban to reverse these unacceptable discriminatory policies and practices targeting women and girls. Mr. President, we are convinced that the adoption of this resolution will provide an updated political, humanitarian, and developmental framework for future dialogue with and on Afghanistan, towards addressing the needs of Afghan people and their brighter future. Let me end this statement by expressing Slovenia's strong support to the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Slovenia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia.
Thank you, President. Malaysia continues to be deeply concerned with the situation in Afghanistan. We reaffirm our commitment to supporting an Afghan-led and Afghan-owned peace and national reconciliation process that is inclusive, rights-based, and ensures the full participation of diverse groups, including women, youth, and ethnic and religious minorities. For almost 4 decades, Afghanistan has been ravaged by conflict and humanitarian crisis. Its people are facing challenges that are causing widespread food insecurity, malnutrition, and persistent unemployment. Close to 25 million Afghans require life-saving assistance. The international community must act swiftly and pragmatically. Through dialogue, diplomacy, and confidence building, we can address these challenges and create a viable pathway to reintegration, one that reflects the shared will and aspirations of the Afghan people as well as the international community. President, Malaysia expresses deep concern over the continued erosion of women and girls' rights in Afghanistan, particularly the ongoing denial of access to secondary and tertiary education. We demand for the immediate removal of all barriers hindering the full realization of this fundamental right. Malaysia believes that the international community must step up its humanitarian engagement in Afghanistan to extend much-needed protections to the most vulnerable. Malaysia commends the efforts of UNAMA, UNODC, UNDP, and other relevant UN entities for their continuous engagement with the de facto authorities to address the drug crisis that has plagued the country for decades. While progress has been made, we must urgently intensify our collective efforts to dismantle trafficking networks and simultaneously invest in sustainable economic alternatives for farmers, ensuring long-term stability and prosperity for Afghanistan and its people. We would like to take this opportunity to reiterate our support to the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Afghanistan and UNAMA for their tireless work in carrying out the mandate given, oftentimes in complex and extremely dangerous environment. Malaysia would like to take this opportunity to recognize the important role played by the regional countries in addressing the threat of terrorism, as well as combating illicit narcotics. Furthermore, the socio-economic cooperation forged through regional solidarity remains key in creating favorable conditions that could lead to the cultivation of peace and reconciliation within Afghanistan. Malaysia echoes the appeal by the Secretary General for funding support that is flexible, predictable, and sustained, including towards supporting the work of the UN Mine Action. Insufficient funding will impact the projects targeting the needs of women and children, spiraling them into further marginalization, vulnerability, and deterioration of their already precarious situation. President, Malaysia continues to sponsor Afghan students, majority of them women, to further their tertiary education in Malaysia in the field of medicine and healthcare under the Malaysian Technical Cooperation Program. Furthermore, through Mercy Malaysia, we have concluded the capacity building training for the medical staff of the Malalai National and Specialized Hospital in Kabul from 7th October to 11th November last year as part of the preparation to upgrade its maternity ward. This will be followed through with the physical upgrade of the Malalai National and Specialized Hospital in Kabul, as well as the Hisar Shahi Medical Center in Jalalabad. To this end, Malaysia is committed to partnering with the international community to support Afghanistan through capacity building initiatives aiming to foster a more resilient and self-sufficient Afghan society. President, on the draft resolution before us this morning, Malaysia thanks Germany for facilitating the negotiations of the text. The draft represents a nuanced balance of various views, and we appreciate the efforts by the facilitator to accommodate different perspectives. Although there is a desire to see more robust language on the humanitarian section, as well as reflection of the evolving situation on the ground, we acknowledge the complexities in reaching a consensual text. Nonetheless, Malaysia will support the draft resolution. To conclude, Malaysia looks forward to strengthening partnerships with the international community to deliver meaningful humanitarian aid, foster human capital development, and provide vital financial support, including by working closely with non-governmental organizations and other stakeholders to create a brighter future for the people of Afghanistan. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Thank you, President. We would like to thank Germany for their efforts in facilitating the resolution on the situation in Afghanistan. Amongst other concerns, Mexico believes that gender equality is an indispensable pillar for peace, security, and sustainable development. In this regard, we are extremely concerned at the situation being faced by women and girls in Afghanistan, particularly given the persistence of institutionalized practices which reinforce their exclusion and severely reduce their participation in public life. The international community has received reports on the limitations in access to humanitarian assistance, education, paid work, health, including the presence of women in public spaces, which directly affects their dignity, autonomy, and well-being. These limitations of the human rights of women and girls certainly are increasing and are progressively getting worse. Mexico believes that we need to redouble efforts to ensure comprehensive protection of women and girls in Afghanistan in accordance with international law on human rights, stressing the superior interests of children and the principles of human dignity and equality. And we are against any rules which undermine their legal rights and the institutional protection that they should enjoy. We recognize the work being done by the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, UNAMA, particularly through actions to provide humanitarian assistance. We fully congratulate the fact that despite the challenges, UNAMA maintains a gender approach in planning, implementing, and assessing assistance, as well as in providing safe and dignified conditions for everyone involved, particularly women and girls in situations of vulnerability. We are also happy to see that this mission continues to address the multifaceted challenges that the country faces, and we hope that the mission will stay as long as its assistance is required. And we would repeat that it's important for regional organizations and countries that have an influence on those that currently hold power in Afghanistan to bring across to them the feeling of the international community with regard to the situation and difficulties being faced by women, and that they provide humanitarian assistance to those that most need it. We would call for an inclusive dialogue where the Afghan population, men and women, drive forward their own proposals aimed at promoting a political process that will bring together all interested parties and guarantee sustainable stability in Afghanistan. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Okay, Mr. President, we thank you for organizing this debate, which is an important opportunity to discuss the situation in Afghanistan. Pakistan is Afghanistan's closest neighbor. Our two great nations have shared destinies, drawing strength from fraternal bonds of geography, history, culture, ethnicity, language, faith, and civilization. As immediate neighbors, peace and stability in Afghanistan is a natural imperative for Pakistan. The people of Afghanistan have suffered immensely. 40 years of civil wars, foreign interventions, violence, and terrorism have wreaked havoc in the country, bringing destruction, instability, chaos, and displacement that did not remain within its borders. For the first time in more than 4 decades, we have seen an end to fighting in Afghanistan. It has been nearly 4 years since the Taliban takeover. There is renewed hope for a better future, for an Afghanistan at peace with itself, its neighbors, and the international community. An Afghanistan which respects and nurtures all Afghans, regardless of considerations of gender, ethnicity, political affiliation, or religion. And a prosperous Afghanistan, free from terrorism, fully integrated into the international community. Yet, there is also an element of despair and fear. Afghan people continue to suffer. Crippling sanctions, a dysfunctional banking system, liquidity crisis, poverty, diminishing humanitarian aid, terrorism, narcotics, and human rights concerns have worsened their plight. Regrettably, Afghan soil also continues to be used by terrorists, often proxies against other countries, particularly Pakistan. Mr. President, we must not abandon Afghanistan. Practical and pragmatic engagement through dialogue and diplomacy is the only way forward. Pakistan has maintained sustained high-level engagement with the de facto authorities. Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Senator Muhammad Ishaq Dar visited Kabul on 19th of April. And in May, we had a successful trilateral dialogue with Afghanistan and China at the foreign ministers level in Beijing. We also support regional forums such as the Moscow format, the foreign ministers meeting of Afghanistan's neighboring countries, and the SCO. We welcome UN-led efforts such as the Doha process for structured engagement with the de facto authorities. Pakistan was, in fact, among the first to call for sustained engagement and proposed a roadmap with clear pathways for normalization. We welcome UN-led efforts to provide alternative livelihoods to farmers following the Taliban's ban on opium cultivation as a step in the right direction. A comprehensive and inclusive framework is urgently needed, with all and equal attention to all issues in a balanced manner, and that also addresses regional concerns as also identified in the independent assessment report. Mr. President, our first priority must be to avert a humanitarian disaster. The 2025 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan is critically underfunded, with only 15.7% required of the required $2.42 billion secured so far. The international community must fully and unconditionally fund this plan. Afghanistan's problems directly impact us. Pakistan has hosted millions of Afghans for decades, and we continue to protect vulnerable Afghans despite our limitations. Since August 2021, an additional 1 million undocumented individuals crossed into Pakistan, creating, among other issues, law and order concerns. The international community, in our view, must share this burden more equitably. Secondly, we must revive the Afghan economy and the banking system, including unfreezing of financial assets, to enable trade and investment. On its part, Pakistan is committed to expanding trade and pursuing regional connectivity initiatives such as the TAPI, Kaza 1000, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan Railway, and extension of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor to Afghanistan that can contribute immensely to development and peace in Afghanistan and the region. Third, we should acknowledge that there is one authority that controls the territory of Afghanistan with no credible challenge to it. We must avoid actions that could ignite another conflict in Afghanistan, which can affect the entire region. We need to ensure that spoilers within or outside Afghanistan are prevented from fomenting instability and terrorism. Fourth, we must ensure that Afghanistan does not become a breeding ground for terrorists that threatens not only its neighbors, but the region and beyond. Terrorism emanating from Afghanistan is a serious threat to its neighbors, particularly Pakistan. ISIL-K continues to target the de facto authorities, while other terrorist entities, including Al-Qaeda, Al-Fitna, Al-Khawarij, TTP, and the Baloch militant groups, continue to operate from ungoverned spaces in Afghanistan. Afghanistan must not become a safe haven for terrorism against any other country. The TTP, with around 6,000 fighters, is the largest UN-designated terrorist group operating from Afghan soil, directly threatening Pakistan's national security. With cross-recruitment between various terrorist groups, including TTP and ISIL-K, the TTP poses a threat not only to our national security, but the region and the world. We continue to see attempts by TTP terrorists to infiltrate into Pakistan from Afghanistan. A significant cache of modern weapons, ammunition, and sophisticated equipment originally left behind by the international forces in Afghanistan have been confiscated by our law enforcement agencies. These weapons have been used by Afghan-based terrorists to launch increasingly sophisticated attacks against Pakistan, including in the last 2 weeks. These incidents underscore the scale and seriousness of the threat we face. Pakistan will continue to take all possible action to ensure the safety and security of its people. We also have credible evidence of collaboration between the TTP and other groups, such as the BLA and the Majid Brigade, aimed at disrupting strategic infrastructure and economic development projects in Pakistan. Mr. President, Pakistan fully shares the international community's expectations from the de facto authorities to fulfill their international obligations, especially women's rights and greater political and social inclusion. We are seriously concerned about the continued restrictions on women and girls, which are inconsistent with international norms and Islamic traditions. At the International Conference on Girls' Education in Muslim Communities, held under the auspices of the Muslim World League in January this year, The Islamabad Declaration reaffirmed the consensus that education for girls is a fundamental human right rooted in Islamic values. Pakistan continues to support educational activities and opportunities for the Afghan youth. The third phase of our Allama Iqbal Scholarship Program is currently underway, benefiting 4,500 Afghan students, one-third of whom are girls. Mr. President, what could not be realized through force will not be achieved through isolation, sanctions, or financial coercion. To the contrary, it could lead to renewed conflict and violence amidst growing poverty and hunger, and generate a fresh exodus of refugees and displacements, which none of the Afghanistan's neighbors are in a position to accommodate. The international community must speak with a unified voice to hold the de facto authorities to their commitments, including not to allow the use of Afghan soil against any country, and to ensure the shared goal of a stable and prosperous Afghanistan free from terrorism, at peace within and without. Pakistan is ready to support regional and international engagement efforts with Afghanistan. There must be clear objectives, reciprocal steps, and a realistic roadmap sensitive to Afghanistan's unique social and political fabric and in the best interests of its people. Pakistan stands committed to playing a constructive and proactive role in helping Afghanistan achieving lasting peace and stability. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kyrgyzstan.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the Kyrgyz Republic reaffirms